Hi friend, this is Soph. Today I want to talk about the difference of being a woman in China versus in the US. Right now, exactly, I've spent half of my life in China and half of my life in the US. When I was in China, I grew up in a major city and my family is, not rich, but also not poor. We're sort of the middle class. I am the only child in my family as a result of the one child policy, and I grew up in northern China. There are some differences between northern China and southern China, but we're not going to dive into it. We're just going to be talking about my experiences. If you don't agree, don't write me a letter. Love you. Let's dive into it. The first topic is birth. Most of you probably know there is a huge expectation in China to have a son. So when my mom was pregnant, there is a pressure for her to have a son. When I was born, clearly not son, no testes. She, I think, loved me as she would a boy, but I can't say the same for my dad and his side of the family because my dad has two siblings. There are three of them. My dad is the middle child and the only son. So my dad having only a girl and allowed to have only a girl is kind of a problem, which it roughly translates to like my grandpa's lineage kind of ended at this generation because my aunts, their children is not going to be bearing the family name. So I remember growing up, my dad would always tease me and ask me, oh, do you want a little younger brother or sister? To which I always answered I want an older brother, which wasn't possible. But he would ask that jokingly and he wouldn't make any comment toward me on my gender, but I've heard from my mother on the comments that my dad made toward my gender. I remember when I was around like very young, like 5 years old maybe, my mom would tell me that my dad said he wished I was the son, he wished I was different. When you're 5 years old, like maybe my mom isn't telling the truth, but like to a 5-year-old, whatever my mom said was the truth, and that's the truth that I've lived with since I was young. So the expectation on having a son, like particularly in northern China, is very prevalent. Like I think even till this day, I think it's a little bit better now because you are allowed to have more kids and you get more shots of getting a son. But back then, when the one child policy was still a thing, it was not very great when you're growing up in an environment where everybody expecting you to be a different gender. And in the US, I haven't noticed similar expectations. I feel like parents are relatively happy regardless of gender. Like obviously if you have 3 girls, you want a boy, but it's not like you wouldn't go to your spouse to say, I wish my child was a different gender. My lineage ended here. How sad. The second topic I want to talk about is kind of the day-to-day of being a woman in China versus the US. When you're living your family life, woman is expected to take on more household responsibilities, and that includes cooking, that includes cleaning, that includes childcare. There is this notion that women should, like, they were born to take on these responsibilities and men were not. And my own family, my dad was the moneymaker. He worked and my mom stayed at home with me when I was growing up. She had a job when I was younger. When I started elementary school, they had an agreement to be like, okay, we don't have grandparents here to take care of Sophia. Therefore, you, my mother, should quit your job and just take care of Sophia. That way she is able to have a healthy childhood and we don't have to spend a lot of money on childcare. And also during that agreement, from what I understand, my dad was promised to give my mom a salary for the housework and the care that she takes of me. But also from my understanding, that kind of pay never materialized. My mom did quit her job, but she didn't have extra pay from my dad to cover her labor that she spent on housework that she was promised in that agreement. And in the US, I think the housework responsibility is a little bit more balanced. At least societally, there isn't like a notion to say you are a woman, therefore you should do more housework. I think in reality, like, women still do more housework than men do, but I think that societal stereotype is not as prevalent as it is in China. Next up is education. And in China, your family's wealth determines a lot when it comes to education. If your family is well off or comfortable, and if you have multiple children, everybody gets education. I don't think there's a distinction or difference between education for girls versus education for boys. However, if your family isn't well off and there are, say, for example, 3 kids, and there is only enough money for 1 kid to go to school, guess who gets prioritized? The boy. And my dad's upbringing education is a perfect reflection of this. Like I said, he is one of 3 and the only boy. Naturally, he was the only person to have gone to high school and the only person who have gone to college. Back in the 80s, going to college is a big deal and it's not cheap. My grandpa is a farmer and he borrowed money for my dad to go to college. They wouldn't be able to go to college because there was just not enough resources for them. In the US, I think from what I've seen, everybody has equal access to education. It's just that the education is fucking expensive. You can get a loan if your family can't support you for undergrad or for grad school, but then you have to spend 10 years to pay it off. And in China, if you've gotten so educated that you got a PhD and you are a woman, all of a sudden there's a stereotype surrounding you saying that you're unmarriable and all that notion. I honestly don't know where that notion comes from. I think it's just, my personal opinion is that society is afraid of smart women. Like, they are educated, they're gonna fight for their own rights. How horrifying. It's so prevalent in China that it becomes like meme material. Like, there are stand-up comedy and skits about women PhD and like their dating life. On the other hand, here in the US, there is not nearly as much stereotype surrounding a female PhD, and it's just, you know, education. After you get education, you graduate and you start working. The most noticeable thing for me in a woman's work life in China is that age discrimination is everywhere. Gender discrimination is also everywhere. First, let's talk about age discrimination. On job sites or like little posters people put up to find like cashier or cleaning lady or just like labor in general, there are going to be a requirement that says, oh, we're looking for a female less than 40 years old and have a high school or middle school education. Like, in that blob, there are so many things wrong with it, in my personal opinion. First of all, age is a big thing. Second of all, like, why does a cashier have to be a woman? I think this, like, posters like this is more prevalent for jobs for private employers, like if you want to work in somebody's home or if you want to work in a supermarket. I think it's less prevalent if you are working for like a Fortune 500 company, whether that's a Chinese company or a foreign invested company. But just in day-to-day job postings, they always talk about how old you need to be, what gender you need to be, and what kind of education you need to have. And I've also heard that once you've reached a certain age, like say 35 or 40, it's going to be a lot harder to find a job if you are not at the top of kind of your industry. An example of that would be if you are like a normal supply chain manager, say like purchasing manager, it's going to be harder for you to find a job at age 45 than it is for a supply chain executive, like a senior VP who was 40 years old, to find a job. In the US, age discrimination is illegal, regardless of whether you work for a private employer or a public employer. Nobody's job post has the age restriction to it. Now, I don't know in reality if someone who is older and is sort of like in middle management position or kind of a middle individual contributor position, whether it's harder for them to find a job at an older age versus a exec. But at least on paper, everybody is the same when it comes to looking for employment when you are older. All right, marriage. In China, when you reach a certain age, everybody expects you to be married. And whether you're married or not becomes sort of small talk material. It's normal for a woman to show up to a family gathering and everybody, all the relatives around her would ask her like, oh, are you seeing someone? Are you dating? And if you're dating someone, they're going to ask, when are you going to get married? And also, if you don't date someone currently, your relatives or friends of your relatives is going to ask you whether you want to be introduced to someone they know that might be suitable for you. Now, sometimes this leads to, actual relationships and marriages, but other times it is very annoying when you are just constantly being asked a very personal part of your life. An example of this in my personal life is actually related to one of my friends. She's my age, 30 years old, and she's dating someone who's older than she is. They've been dating for like maybe a year and a half, and her mother, who I've met, which is honestly really hard to believe, that she said, you should get married soon. I know you aren't the happiest in this relationship, but you should get married regardless. It's good enough. Like, it's kind of hard for me to understand that if your daughter doesn't think the person that you're dating is maybe not the one, why are you, the mother who want her to be happy for the rest of her life, force her hand and constantly nagging her about getting married to this person that she isn't obsessed with? But I think that's a perfect example of how, like, when you reach a certain age, marriage should just happen. It doesn't matter if the person you're marrying isn't the right one, just get married anyway. Like, that kind of blows my mind. I'm sure there's a factor driving that thought. I don't know what it is, but it baffles me. In the US, whether you're married or not, it's definitely less a topic of conversation. Like, you don't show up to a family gathering and ask your single relative and be like, are you dating? Are you getting married? Nor do you tell them, be like, John, he's good enough. He may not be the best, but you should just go with him anyway. All right, next, children. In China, if you are a woman, you are expected to have a child or children. If you don't want a kid, you are going to have to put up a massive fight. So big so that I've heard instances of girls that stopped conversations, connections with their family altogether because they don't want to have a kid, but their parents insist on her having a kid. Now, it's not to say that, you know, it's not possible to not have a kid. It is. You just have to go through a lot to be able to make that choice and continue making that choice for the rest of your life. On the other hand, in the US, I think if a woman says they don't want to have kids, I think maybe people will still ask, like, have you changed your mind? But it's definitely not as prevalent as it is in China, nor does the woman have to put up a massive fight with her family and her close ones to be able to make that choice. Also, if you decide to have a child, whether you have it yet is also a topic of small talk. If you just got married, everybody's gonna ask, when are you having a kid? And if you're married for a while and you still don't have a kid yet, people don't assume that it's a choice that you made, that you want to be think for a couple of years, double income, no kids for a couple of years before you have a kid. People don't assume that. What people do assume is that there's something wrong with you, your body, your partner, or their body. In the US, I don't think there is that assumption that there is something wrong with you or your body after you've been married for a while. All right, there are a lot more differences that I could have talked about, but my storage on my phone is almost full. So I'll maybe film another one next time, but I'll see you back here again soon for that. And for now, bye.